to talk about our activities and the path towards meeting interim milestones and goals. Given the enormous amount of press and the conflation of a whole bunch of issues, I would like to conclude with 2 slides that I think, or I hope, set this in context. This is a pyramid of all of the injection wells of one type or another in the state of California. There are some 50,000 injection wells that include cyclic steam, water flood, steam flood, and so forth. Of those, nearly 40,000, these are round numbers, nearly 40,000 are cyclic steam wells. Of those, then in addition, there are over 2,000 wells that are involved in enhanced oil recovery, water flood, steam flood. All of those in green are activities that are taking place in hydrocarbon oil-bearing reservoirs. If they haven't been exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act, the presence of economically recoverable amounts of oil makes them very likely, not absolute certainty, of course, until it's done, but very likely to be exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act because, as my colleague from the state water board sitting to my right has said a number of times, water that mixed with oil is not something we want people drinking. That leaves then in our program 532 wells that are out of compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act that are injecting into non-oil bearing zones. Of those, we have identified 176 of those wells that are injecting into water of relatively high quality, been stated to be drinking water. It's potential drinking water, but it's not necessarily drinking water. And that includes the wells that are injecting into the so-called 11 aquifers that have been historically considered exempt. So we have closed 23 of these wells in concern for public health. This is the proximity of an injection well to a beneficial use well. And as you heard Director Nicodem talk, we have a process to continue this review, to make certain of our data, to work with operators either to voluntarily have them give up their permits or to close wells by order. So this is the focus of our attention as it relates to public safety. Finally, let me say that public and environmental health is one of the top priorities. It is the top priority of the division. It is the first paragraph in our mission statement. It is something that I have discussed extensively with the division since coming to the division. And our goal is to safeguard public health and the environment and the safety of oil workers. We have shut in wells with the greatest potential risk for public health. We will continue that review and will continue to shut in wells as we find situations that have the potential to have negative impact on public health. We expect to complete our review of the highest priority wells and shut in appropriate wells as needed within the next several weeks. And this is part of a larger compliance schedule as outlined by the US EPA approval of our plan that we received yesterday. Thank you very much. The Water Board.
Good morning. I'm Jonathan Bishop. I'm the Chief Deputy Director of the State Water Resource Control Board. Thank you for asking me here today. You asked me to address 4 issues with the invitation, and I will endeavor to do that. The first was the role of the Water Board in ensuring the protection of California's water from contamination from underground injection wells. In 1988, a memorandum of agreement between the Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources, known as DOGGR, and the State Water Resource Control Board was signed. The MOA designated DOGGR as the lead agency for Class 2 underground injection control program oversight, as you've heard already, in California. Additionally, required DOGGR to consult with the water boards during its consideration of a underground injection control project, which permitted injection wells, one or more injection wells. The MOA also designated the regional water boards as lead agencies for surface discharge. The water boards historically relied on the determinations made by DOGR regarding aquifer exemption status. Starting with the implementation of SB4, our role has increased. Under SB4, the water boards are required to review groundwater monitoring plans. And as part of that work related to SB4, the water boards found that some of the aquifers may not have been properly exempted by DOGR and US EPA. In June of last year, the governor's office directed the State Water Board to assist DOGR in their review of the UIC projects and aquifer exemptions to evaluate potential health threats and water quality posed by injection of fluids into aquifers that may be suitable for drinking water quality. On February 6, 2015, DOGR and the State Water Board submitted a plan to the US EPA that outlined the approach to work together for a more integrated oversight of the UIC program. The plan outlined measures to ensure that aquifers used for wastewater disposal are properly exempted, review UIC project proposals submitted by well operators to ensure protection of beneficial uses, evaluate existing UIC wells that may have injected fluids into aquifers that have not been properly exempted, and assess any threats to public health and water quality. As you've heard, on March 9th, US EPA forwarded a letter back to the DOGR and the water boards outlining agreed upon deadlines and milestones for implementing the February 6th plan. The criteria used by the water boards when reviewing aquifer exemptions applications include a review of the current and future potential beneficial uses of the water, and that includes not only for drinking water, but also for other uses such as irrigation or industrial uses. It evaluates if there are any pertinent elements from a regional water quality control board's basin plan that would be implemented, and looks at the technical demonstration by an operator that the waste will remain in the exempted portion of the aquifer. Your second question was, how does the model criteria and other activities required under SB4 interact with the underground injection control program? There is a little interaction, which I'll go over, though they tend to be different areas of oil field operation. SB4 allows an operator to demonstrate the lack of protected water as one of the criteria for not needing a groundwater monitoring plan. Understanding where aquifers are exempted, what are the boundaries of those exemptions, is important in that review of the SB4 groundwater monitoring plan. So that's an area of overlap. Groundwater monitoring conducted as part of the SB4 requirements may indicate impacts to groundwater, which may or may not be easily distinguished between different oil field activities. So there may be some overlap as we review groundwater monitoring programs. And finally, the groundwater monitoring programs, both the operator implemented and the regional monitoring implemented by the State Water Resource Control Board, will provide greater understanding of the aquifers associated with oil field activities as we move forward. Your third question was, what has the Water Board found to date in mapping and monitoring aquifers affected by underground injection control? Water Board staff has identified some water supply wells located within a 1-mile radius of UIC wells identified by DOGR as a potential concern because of the total dissolved solids being less than 3,000. UIC wells that are potentially impacting water supply wells identified by the water board staff by reviewing information of the UIC wells, locating water supply wells within a 1 mile radius, using available information, including DWR's well logs, reports from the Division of Drinking Water. I should note that this doesn't necessarily identify all potential wells because those sources of data are not necessarily complete. The UIC wells potentially impacting water supply wells include injection wells into sub 3,000 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids, as you've heard earlier, and that meet either of the following criteria. The uppermost depth of the injection zone is less than 1,500 feet below ground surface. Regardless of if there are any existing wells in the area, that is a shallow zone and that would be potentially usable as a source for beneficial use. Or if the uppermost depth of the injection zone is within 500 vertical feet and within 1 mile horizontal of a screened portion of an existing well. So if either of those conditions exist, we consider there's a potential for impact, and we require additional information and request that Dogger stop injection in those zones. In 2014, the Central Valley Water Board issued information orders, we call them 13267 orders, to 10 operators for 31 underground injection wells that were identified as potentially impacting water supply wells. The information orders required the operator to submit information about groundwater quality and to conduct a water well supply survey. Water supply well survey, I think is a better way to say that. Water quality data from the geologic formation within the injection zone. In addition, the Central Valley Water Board staff also collected groundwater samples from 9 water supply wells that were in close proximity to the injection wells. The water quality data from those wells did not indicate that there had been an impact to those wells to date from the injection, which is good news. Additionally, there was notices of violation issued to 7 operators for not submitting their information timely. Those notices of violation resulted in the submittals, and no operators were fined for that. They did get their data in once we issued that violation. On March 3rd and 4th of 2015, the Central Valley Water Board issued additional information orders to 6 well operators for 13 wells that were potentially identified as potentially impacting water supply. Those orders were similar to the orders issued in 2014, requiring the operators to submit information about water quality and conduct well surveys. Additionally, 3 operators were required to sample nearby wells to determine if there had been any impact. The Water Board is continuing to evaluate UIC wells that have been identified by Dogger that are injecting into non-exempt aquifers as we move forward. Your fourth question was, what will the Water Board be doing moving forward to prevent contamination of California's drinking water supply? The water boards will continue to work with Dogger to implement the plan submitted in February of this year to ensure that aquifers being used for UIC injection are properly exempted as we move forward. Review proposed underground injection control project proposals submitted by operators to ensure the protection of drinking water and other beneficial uses. Review existing underground injection control wells that may have been injecting into aquifers that have not been properly exempted, and continuing to assess any threats and potential threats to water supplies. I'd like to take a minute to summarize the plan in terms of a little more detail than you heard earlier. The plan requires that for non-exempt, non-hydrocarbon aquifers, so these are those aquifers that are not part of the production of oil and did not have an exemption from US EPA, no new injection wells will be allowed. If any existing injection wells in those aquifers are identified that are potential to impact water supply that we've been talking about, they will cease injection immediately. If there are any wells that are not fall within that criteria that I described earlier, but are still within non-exempt aquifers with less than 3,000 TDS, they will cease operation by October 2015. And for those that are in non-exempt aquifers but are greater than 3,000 TDS, they would be required to stop injection by February 15, 2017. For non-exempt hydrocarbon zones, these are areas that have oil production going on, we will assess if there is any beneficial use of those aquifers. If there is beneficial use of those aquifers, no new injection wells will be allowed. And existing injection wells will have to cease by 2017, February 2017. If no beneficial use is identified in those aquifers, and there are existing approved projects, then new injection wells would be allowed under the express condition that they must either have an exemption or cease operation by February 15, 2017. For the 11 aquifers that were described as historically treated as exempt, no new injection wells will be allowed, and they must cease, existing injection must cease by December 31st, 2016. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Before we get to questions, Secretary Laird, it looks like it's quarter after. Why don't you come up and join our panelists? One big happy family. Thank you for being here.
I'm just going to take the liberty of standing here. And Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for taking me out of sequence. And my thoughts are also with Senator Pavley, and I really look forward to her ability to come back soon. And the fact that I'm out of sequence presents one issue, which is you're hearing from the hands-on people, and yet you have yet to be able to ask them questions. And I was going to follow Secretary Rodriguez, who the administration asked to lay out the entire chronology of this, which he did in a letter, which is the best chronology of what happened leading to this moment, and you have yet to be able to hear that and hear that from him. And you also heard that there had been a request in February for a way to proceed, and that late yesterday, the federal EPA signed off on it in the letter that was distributed to you. And I want to then reference that in my comments as well. And this issue, the issue of oil and gas, has just been at the forefront since this administration took office 4 years ago. I recall a huge meeting that Senator Fuller facilitated in the first months of the administration. We worked with the legislature on budget augmentations for the Division of Oil and Gas in 2011 and 2012 to build their capacity to do what they were charged with currently. In 2013, we worked very closely with the legislature on SB 4, which we are now implementing. And last year, we brought in Dr. Boland from the outside to really bring new leadership and work on culture changes at the Division of Oil and Gas. So that has been in the forefront. As was mentioned, in response to this specific issue last summer, immediately as it came to the attention, I think, of the agency head and other people in the administration, an interagency team was formed to assess the scope of the problem and address any risk to public health and the state's groundwater supplies. The initial response, as has been preliminarily mentioned here, involved shutting down 11 injection wells that represented the greatest risk of contamination, halting approvals of new wells in non-exempt areas, and initiating a systematic review of the other wells to ensure the protection of public health and environmental safety. That review included analyzing water quality in the injection zones and identifying the potential for contamination of drinking water. To date, no contamination has been detected from wastewater injection activities in the supply wells tested by the State Water Board. Protecting public health and California's groundwater resources is our primary goal, particularly in this time of unprecedented drought. The administration takes very seriously any practices that undermine our efforts to achieve that goal. A fundamental component in taking the corrective actions needed to ensure public health and that California's groundwater are protected is a better understanding of how these practices historically occurred. And that brings us to the study that's been referred to numerous times, that at the request of the governor's office, the Environmental Protection Agency, the state one, reviewed the history and origins of the state's permitting of oil and gas operators to inject wastewater into aquifers that are or could become sources of drinking water. And Secretary Rodriguez will inform you in detail of the findings of the review in his presentation. But I will say that the challenge that we have before us is the unwinding of actions based on flawed decision-making and a lack of deference to basic management protocols that go back as far as 1983. Central to correcting these longstanding deficiencies in the UIC program, and everybody always says UIC, the governor hates acronyms. He sort of has a bowl, you drop $1 in if you use one, so I feel obligated to say underground injection control at least once so people understand. And ensuring full compliance with the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act is a plan submitted by the division and the State Water Board to US EPA that was essentially endorsed yesterday, late yesterday, in the letter that was distributed. And as State Oil and Gas Supervisor, Dr. Bolin walked you through the details of the plan, but it's important for the legislature and the public to know that the division is undergoing an extensive review of all UIC injection wells while prioritizing the review of those injection wells that are at greatest risk of contaminating aquifers that are likely to be used for water supply. Thus far, as has been mentioned by all of us in some form, 23 injection wells have been voluntarily or ordered shut in, along with orders or agreements for oil producers to provide water quality testing of injection well injectate in nearby drinking water aquifers. It's also worthy to note that this plan consists of interim and final deadlines that will result in this program being fully compliant within 2 years. And the agency, the department, and the division are fully committed to meeting these deadlines. And presupposing a legislative concern that might even be a question, these milestones are public, our responses to them will be public, and you and the public will be able to track the process or progress of that process given those milestones laid out and how the response to them is laid out as well. And lastly, many of you have had the opportunity to meet with Supervisor Bolin, and like me have probably walked away with the opinion that the state's fortunate that he continues to come back to work every day given the challenges that he faces. And in the months and years ahead, he'll probably need additional staff and resources to try to deal with these issues that have been plopped in front of him, including the modernizing of the data management systems that exist in the agency. he has my commitment to get him what he needs, and I hope that if it gets to that, the legislature will work with us on those issues when it comes. The division has the dual statutory mandate, and we seem to be wedded to dual goals in this state, the dual statutory mandate of facilitating oil and gas recovery in the state, as well as protecting life, health, property, and natural resources from such activities. This is an opportunity to ensure the mandate is followed in proper balance. And I would suggest that since 1983, there has not been the proper balance between these two mandates, and this is our chance to make it right. So there's much work to do ahead in the coming months, and it's our intent to keep the legislature informed of any and all progress we make as we get this program back on track. I know I'm running out of time, but I would answer questions if there are before you go back to your presentations.
No, I think we can start off. I'm reminded of the great words of President Reagan, trust but verify. So with that, Senator Walk, you can start off our questioning.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent quote. Thank you.
Because he was president in 1983.
Thank you, Secretary Laird. Thank you very much for giving us that overview. And I have just a major concern, and that is that as I look, being the current chair of Budgets Up To and looking at the history of this, and you've made reference to that, I mean, really, it's a flawed agency in many, many ways in terms of protecting the groundwater, which should be, you refer to it as a balance between the oil and gas industry and protecting the health and safety of the underground aquifer. That balance really it's gone out of whack. There's no doubt in my mind. This really isn't about oil and gas. It's about the public and protecting the groundwater, and I know that you understand that. The history since 2010 in the Budget Subcommittee is that the resources have been given and allocated, along with commitments for reports and a number of things that simply don't come back. And I appreciate the state plan, and I appreciate the plan that's been worked out and the March 9th letter from the EPA. But what guarantees, this is a management issue, what guarantees do we have that there are going to be changes in management practices and oversight to assure that this plan is implemented? That's been the problem, not resources, it seems to me.
Actually, first, just over and above, there is the commitment to do it. If there's any reports that have not been made, please bring them to my attention, and that will be made right. And I think our commitment is that, and you see the existing capacity for just issuing permits and monitoring things in the facilitation of the issuance of those permits. There was not the capacity to do that adequately when we walked in the door. And that is what those 2 years of additions were. And then it took 12 months through the state personnel process to actually fill all those positions. So we are finally getting to the point of seeing the impact of that. And the supervisor can speak to it more specifically, but he is just committed, and his primary thing is getting a hold of an agency that in essence had not had clear direction in a very long time, and that is our commitment.
I appreciate that directness. Thank you.
So I guess we have the, what is it, SB 855. There's a report supposed to provide, Dogger's supposed to provide us with updates every year for 5 years. Dr. Nekadom, we've received one report, I believe, in the 5 years. Can we have your response to the senator's concern?
I became aware that that was a requirement just recently. I had trusted that the division was producing whatever it needed to report. So it is my responsibility, obviously, but I was not aware that SB 855 reporting was required until just recently.
But the finish to that question is then you will get to producing it.
And you will
right?
have every
Yes.
single report due to you.
I know somewhere out there in TV land, Senator Pavley is listening and is concerned that evidently she's been requesting those reports pursuant to SB 855.
And, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Next week, I believe, we have a hearing at Budget Sub 2 with your department, so I certainly hope Fran Pavley is back, but in any case, we'll be following up with that.
Senator Allen.
Just quickly, Secretary Laird, just want to reiterate, and I know that Fran feels very strongly about this as well, that you know, I welcome your taking personal responsibility for oversight. Obviously, this is not an issue that's just coming up. We've had a report from 2011 about these challenges and these problems, and I think you're hearing people on this panel expressing concern about you and your role taking a very active and engaged role in making sure that we get these problems cleaned up at Dogger. And so I welcome your comments, and I just wanted to add my voice to Senator Wilk, Senator Pavley, and others who feel very strongly about this.
I appreciate that very much, and I just have to say retroactively that I wish, as budget chair, when I was in the legislature, I'd done more oversight, because I might be in a better position standing here right now.
Yeah,
if
well,
we
this
had.
is obviously